death, judgment, heaven, and hell. These are the four last things. Purgatory is in there too, as the anteroom to heaven. For weeks past and still to come, we've been encouraged to think about death, what St. Paul calls today our last enemy, about heaven, the place he describes as for those who belong to Christ, and about hell, described by Jesus today as the eternal fire for the accursed. But in between comes judgment. Judgment is not a popular idea these days, outside the law at least. We don't like judgy or judgmental people who import truckloads of high moral ground from which to wag their fingers at others as if they were perfect themselves. So when we hear in our gospel today that Christ will return as King and Judge, on a seat of power but also of judgment, as a shepherd for the sheep but casting out the goats, it's somewhat confronting. It's challenging enough to be told to visit, feed, clothe, and welcome the needy. But to be told that our eternal destiny depends on it can seem threatening. But it is our Catholic faith that death puts an end to human life as the time open for either accepting or rejecting the divine grace manifested in Christ. And that there is a particular judgment where each is rewarded immediately after death in accordance with his faith and works. As St. John of the Cross put it, at the evening of life, we shall be judged on our love. As well as our own particular judgment at death, there will be a last or general judgment at the end of time and the resurrection of the dead, when Christ will return as truth and justice and glory, and all be laid bare before him. Because of our unease with death, judgment, and hell, the Church gives us November each year to think about such things, and then Advent to prepare for them. Over the past few weeks, I've tried to show how in God justice and mercy are not rivals as they can be in us. Indeed, the history of salvation might be viewed as the interplay of divine justice and mercy in the face of human rebellion and return, coming to its climax in the four last things. So how are we to approach our own judgment? My thought for you today is that we should face it with that fear of the Lord that is the beginning of wisdom, but also with that hope in the Lord that is its end. Rather than going through life with a Gothic horror story at the back of our minds, we should see the judgment as the consummation of a love story, the story of God and humanity, of Jesus and each soul. Our gospel today describes the private and public dimensions of this, the particular judgment and the general. We know all we've done in our lives and what was in our hearts, but we're not the best judges of our own case. Christ also knows, and he is the best of judges. On that day when all is revealed, it will be plain for all to see, those who cared and those who didn't, sheep and goats. That makes us tremble, but it is also a cause for hope. Only at the last judgment will there be redress for the grave injustices of history that we are powerless to make right. The dispossession of Aborigines, the Holocaust of Jews, the abuse of little ones. We can sometimes punish perpetrators and offer redress to survivors, but we cannot undo the harm that's been done. Without a final judgment, as Pope Benedict observed, such injustices remain forever. Christ's second coming, however, makes things right for the victims, and indeed for the rest of us who may feel polluted by some past injustice or be beneficiaries of it. God can bring justice in a way we cannot conceive, the Pope observed. Yet we can begin to grasp it through faith. Yes, there is a resurrection of the flesh. There is justice. There is an undoing of past suffering, a reparation that sets things right. For this reason, faith in the last judgment, he said, is first and foremost hope. That hope is not just for an eventual balancing of the books. No, it promises a transformation when, in the face of eternal truth and goodness and beauty, all that is right shines with reflected light, and all that is rotten falls away. Those who've destroyed their desire for truth and made everything a lie, who've suppressed all love in themselves and lived for hate, will be free to continue their hellish choice to separate from God. But for the rest, including the morally and spiritually wounded like ourselves, there will be purgation in the fire of truth, healing in the warmth of love, preparation for eternal union. So the doctrine of judgment need not frighten us. It is vindication for the innocent and hope for those open to purification. But there's a third reason to greet Christ's return with excitement more than trepidation. In our first reading and psalm today, God is compared with a judge who separates sheep from goats, but who also guides, rescues, feeds, and bandages. Ezekiel's shepherd God stands not at a distance, but right in the middle of his sheep, to keep them all in view. Reflecting on this very text, in his self-description as the Good Shepherd, but also in today's prophecy of Judgment Day, Jesus calls his flock brothers and sisters of mine. Says people will be judged by what they did for the sake of these, and regards what's done for them as done for him. Jesus' identification with us is complete. He is one of us. So when we care for each other, and especially the most needy, we see the face of Christ. And when Christ judges us, he sees himself in us. Come, you carers for the poor and strangers, for they are me, St. Hippolytus hears Jesus say. Come, you who fostered love, for I am love. Come, you who shared peace, for I am peace. You are my own flesh and blood, my brothers and sisters, my lookalikes. If that is how the universal King and just Judge thinks of us, we can trust that his judgment will be merciful. When Christ came at the first Christmas, it was joy to the world. When he returns at the second Christmas, that is the last judgment, it will be joy to the world again. But by our faith and action, we will suit ourselves to enter into that celebration or not. As we celebrate the first coming at Christmas, we prepare for the second through Advent. For along with the merciful doctrines of heaven and hell, death and purgatory, we have the merciful doctrine of judgment. And it is on that judgment day that we work and hope and pray to hear those precious words, "Come, blessed of my Father, receive the inheritance prepared for you from the foundation of the world."